Advantage 1 is deterrence. Ukraine supreme. Having a task escalate, miscalculate Putin's motivations make it likely. Toll 22. Ukraine is a demonstration of Putin's willingness to change European security through force. Putin's goal has been to fracture NATO's cohesion and manifest dysfunction. Ukraine demonstrates Putin undertake highly risky measures. The Kremlin weakened the Baltic through subconventional methods, political war, info ops, violation of Baltic waters and airspace. The risks of deliberate provocations or mishaps are high. Actions take the form of seizure of bits of territory, attacks against CI, or invasion. Putin could take advantage of rising tensions between minorities to escalate tensions. Russia could conduct incursions to test NATO's resolve and undermine credibility. Invasion is imminent. Baker 423. Ukraine has sent shockwaves to NATO's Baltic, who fear they could become future targets of Russian aggression. Those countries on the front line are scrambling. There is an imminent need of a stronger NATO presence. Russia is an existential threat, particularly to our region, but in a broader sense to all of Europe. If they don't act now, they could be caught unprepared. The need to be prepared given Russia's demonstrated pattern of aggression against its neighbors. If Russian forces drag the conflict, Moscow is likely to turn to another country. Russia is the most direct threat to European security. The Russians are unpredictable, make Putin understand that the pain would be unacceptable. These countries have been under-defended. NATO had been worried about their vulnerability. Our analysis of Russia is correct in this instance. Social movement of Ukraine 22. It is high time the left carried a concrete analysis instead of reproducing worn-out frameworks. Overlooking Russian imperialism is a terrible mistake. It is Putin, not NATO, waging the war on Ukraine. Imperialism involves revisionist nationalism. Putin moved to an ethnic concept of Russianness. His aggression was legitimized by the return of originally Russian lands. Imperialism is fueled by the desire to change the world order. Putin's demand for NATO's withdrawal from Eastern Europe signal Russia may not stop. Poland, Latvia, Lithuania, or Estonia may be next. It is naive to demilitarize. That would be appeasing Russia and will make countries vulnerable. Putin's regime offers no alternative to capitalism. It is an authoritarian oligarchic capitalism. The level of inequality has risen significantly. In his worldview, the rich have the right to exploit. For political change to come about, Russia must be defeated. That goes nuclear. Nuclear disparity and escalate to de-escalate makes it likely. BRICS 22. Russia has 10-to-1 advantage over the US and NATO and NSNWs. TNWs are meant for use against military installations. Of increasing concern is escalate to de-escalate. It assesses first use for de-escalate a conflict. These increase miscalculate escalation. Russia might employ a TNW during a conventional conflict with NATO for preventing a defeat, consolidating gains, or freezing a conflict. Moscow attacks the Baltic, invoking A5, NATO response. Moscow then contemplates exploding a TNW as a warning. NATO response could lead to all-out nuclear war in the Baltics. The plan solves durable, predictable, and sustainable U.S. security cooperation through NATO, wedded to cyber and AI boost credibility, decision-making, and deterrence. Lucas 22. Improve exercises in the Baltic, exercises improve capabilities. The goal should be credibility. NATO ISR capabilities, including their interop, should be routinely exercised. Allied decision-making around sub-threshold threats significantly impact deterrence. Exercising escalation should account for hybrid tactics, which include influence ops, cyber attacks, and new tech. AI decision tools and environments may be more cost-effective and faster. By building on U.S. security assistance, all of Europe will be safer. Improved ISR contributes to speed of recognition, vital in hybrid war situations. Countries should leverage autonomous surveillance. Overall, the classifications around data to ensure seamless info sharing. Within the alliance, rules are complicated and conservative. Provide predictable, sustainable, and durable security assistance, enhancing deterrence and unwavering U.S. commitment. Security assistance create interoperable capabilities. The Baltic states depend on allies to close capability gaps. The U.S. should program multi-year funding. A2AD deters invasion. Success requires AI and cyber integration. Version in 20. Emerging tech and AI are shifting the balance back to defense. A2AD zones are comprised of ISR. ISR systems spot incoming threats. Computers allow algorithms to process thousands of images and allows prediction of trajectories. The US has been working on capability. This data will generate an early warning system. The network must be robust and secure. Computing tech introduces comms that are long range and impossible to break into. The digital network, decentralized command and control. This removes headquarters as a single point of failure. A2AD soak up tremendous amounts of firepower without effects, decoys and deception of absorb firepower. A strike would consist of a cyber attack to disrupt the enemy network. Time to allow aircraft to penetrate A2AD. By utilizing ISR, a defender gains a nearly indestructible system. Cohesive security cooperation solves Baltic War. Kandla 22. Security cooperation between the Baltic is still more declarative than actual, caused by lack of leadership. Russia acted to undermine cohesion and credibility. A conventional attack will be a combination with destroying CI. Cyber attacks, the hybrid scenario will be the most likely. Large-scale attack cannot be ruled out. Baltic militaries can cooperate and increase credibility of NATO. The issue is interoperability to act coherently and efficiently different weapon systems, bringing different organization. Following NATO standards and joint procurements arises from necessity. Inclusion of NATO is necessary for collective defense of the Baltics, Urban List 20. The defense of Baltic states is based on the viability of NATO. Theoretically, the US can provide bilateral guarantees, but because of its location, the defense requires involvement of allies. German, Belgian, and Dutch ports and railways, Norwegian and British fleets, and French rapid response can be best utilized under NATO. The US looks at the Baltic through NATO. The signal of NATO's defense posture delegitimizes Russian aggression, Klein 19. Effects of our approach to defend the Baltics will be denial-based. NATO Baltics defense hinges on perception. Russia is deterred if it perceives NATO solidarity and preponderance of support. Area denial compares favorably to alternatives. It is a defensive concept that preserves the square, allowing NATO to dominate the narrative. It is more palatable to NATO than offensive-minded concepts. Tech are making area denial attractive from a practical standpoint. These include cyber capabilities. NATO should knit partners together in a network system of C4ISR targeting early warning. Thus the plan. The United States federal government should substantially increase its cooperation with the North Atlantic Treaty Organization over the Baltics in artificial intelligence and cybersecurity-enabled exercises and capabilities. Advantage 2 is assurance. Proliferation is fast. Ukraine sent the worst message in history. Einhorn 22. Invasion upended norms essential to non-prolif. The war proved the greatest stimulus to prolif in history. Concerns are shared by many experts. States under threat reconsider a nuclear deterrent to guarantee security. The perception that Putin's saber-rattling succeeded in deterring NATO increased the fears of potential victims that they could be left without a protector. Absent strengthened US guarantees, prolif is inevitable. T-Team 22. Norms against prolif are breaking down. Governments looking at Ukraine may conclude a nuclear arsenal can help a state impose its will. Countries build weapons when they cannot count on security guarantees. In the wake of invasion, countries seek guarantees. The US need to show their sources of security, and they work without a race for nuclear weapons. NATO cooperation over the Baltics assuages allied fears. Con 18. Russian interests are ambiguous, leave speculation and misinterpret. NATO cannot be sure. Russia frequently issues nuclear threats towards NATO to limit create political problems. They pressure NATO to review its nuclear components. Such event risks eroding unity. Alliance at odds over its own deterrence can be perceived as weak, making it a target for blackmail and coercion. Preserving unity is key. New gen warfare is challenging. Baltic states are subject to disinfo and hate speech. NATO needs a comprehensive strategy. It takes into account allies in a wider region. The alliance should enhance resilience, such as electricity outages, cyber attacks, and destabilization efforts. Prolif causes nuclear war. Critic 15. Spread of nuclear weapons poses nuclear war, terror, further prolif. The more states, the greater probability there will be nuclear war. New states lack second strike. States incentive to use first. States believe as first strike capability launch preventive strikes. State with vulnerable arsenal, if you use or lose. Even in MAD, there's a risk of nuclear war, not irrational. States have conflicts of interest, playing games of brinkmanship. Increased risk of nuclear war, future dies with fewer sources of stability, result in devastating nuclear exchange. Credible US security commitments reduce conflict. BRICS 16. US security commitments and deterrence results receive broad support in a study spanning 2 centuries. Alliances lower conflict military forces in the theater is key. Mark the card that military forces in the theater is key.
You good?
Yeah.
When has Russia cyber attacked the Baltics over the past year?
They have been.
What piece of evidence describes that Russia has actually launched any cyber attacks?
The toll evidence as well as the Lucas evidence indicates that Russia has had ongoing cyber attacks. And
Why have
they've
those
been probing
cyber
into the
attacks
Baltics
not
as well.
escalated?
Russia has not invaded the Baltics.
Yeah.
Our uniquest argument is that Russia is currently stationing troops near the region. They're moving ICBMs to Kaliningrad and nuclear submarines to the Baltic Sea region. They're preparing for an invasion now.
Russia's been doing that for the course of a year. Why have cyber attacks not caused this escalate to de-escalate phenomenon?
Well, because Russia hasn't invaded. Our argument is not that cyber attacks cause conflict, but rather that Russia will use large-scale cyber attacks in the advent of an invasion to gain the upper hand.
Okay, so what signs say that Russia is going to invade if they haven't for a year? What about April is
I was explaining this earlier. Russia has been moving troops to Kaliningrad, to the border, moving nuclear submarines to the region, as well as the fact that their failures in Ukraine requires them to divert their attention away from the Ukraine conflict by invading the Baltics.
Their failure in Ukraine means they're going to overstress their resources even further.
Our cards make the distinction between the Ukrainian military and the Baltics militaries. It says that the Baltic region is inherently more difficult to defend because of things like geography and the smaller sizes of those nations, which means that Russia.
That Russia has the ability to sustain forces in both Ukraine and the Baltics.
Baker, Lucas, Klein,
Where does it say that they have the capability to sustain invasion forces?
Baker cut says, quote, "There's an imminent need of a stronger NATO presence.
Right.
Russia is an existential threat, particularly to our region."
Yeah, that does not say that they have the ability to
Quote,
invade both Ukraine and
Estonia,
Poland
Latvia, and
simultaneously.
Lithuania, if they don't act now, they could be caught unprepared.
These are all hypothetical scenarios. I'm asking in the context of Ukraine, what evidence says Russia can invade both Ukraine and the Baltics at the same time?
Every piece of evidence we read, that's about how Russia is moving nuclear presence to the region.
All right. The Pearl of Advantage, you read a card from 2022 saying Ukraine has sent the worst signal in history. Your solvency card comes from 2018 and says that NATO would assuage allied fears. How does that price in Ukraine sending the worst signal in history?
The Ironhorn evidence is also about how the United States needs to assure our allies through NATO. The Ironhorn evidence indicates, the Ironhorn evidence
What
is
card
the one.
says that cooperating over the Baltics in 2022 is going to solve?
Yeah, the reason why cooperation with the Baltics is key is because allies need to see that America is willing to defend hard to defend allies.
But the Einhorn evidence does not even mention the Baltics.
The Ironhorn evidence is about the Baltics.
Where does
So
it
is
say
the Baker
Baltics?
evidence from today that says that America needs to reassure allies.
Where's this evidence?
The Baker evidence is the
No, where's
second
the
part.
Einhorn evidence about the Baltics?
The card is about how Putin's saber rattling has succeeded in deterring NATO.
I don't see the
and
word
how it
Baltics
has-
in this card. The only card about the Baltics on the second advantage is from 2018.
No, the Baker evidence is about assurance, and it's from today.
The 1MC was sent. The order is for off-case positions, and then going to the case in order of deterrence, assurances. Sorry, what? No, it's okay. Is anyone not ready? Cool. NATO's bureaucratic processes necessitate tenuous negotiations that would be an inappropriate forum for something as imminent as a Russian invasion of the Baltics. As cross-examination proved, the notion that Russia is going to invade the Baltics is ludicrous, especially when they're caught up in the Ukrainian war, and there are zero empirical examples of actual cyber attacks escalating in the region. First is T substantial. Substantial security cooperation means all activities in an area. UN 82. In the area means all activities of the area. Violation, they only coordinate Baltic cybersecurity. That's a mitigating limit for different limits of ground, including any affirmative that marginally changes security cooperation is policy exposed the topic to include a bunch of tiny pieces that dodge core topic attacks and make that untenable. Next is T consensus. Interpretation, the affirmative must go through consensus. NATO operations required, not at 16. All NATO operations decided upon by the North Atlantic Council, which contributes to the NATO legal personality. The NC adopted consensus decision to adopt that formal voting could have no member racist objection. Violation, they don't go through it. Voter for limits and ground. It flows negative prep burden and restores access to consensus-based status. Next off is the FNC's counterplan. Text. The United States federal government should establish a framework nations concept over the Baltics and artificial intelligence and cybersecurity-enabled exercises and capabilities with the following countries. The counterplan competes by remaining distinct from NATO's operational and consensus structure and stalled by inducing follow-on. Independently spills out to legitimize multilateral and flexible arrangements within NATO. Arts and Kill 21. Members endorse FNC flexible format enables NATO members to fill critical capability gaps, creates more formal groups and commitment, rely on organizational command, and remain independent of operational structure, include non-NATO countries. Consensus is not required. Provide greater flexibility, building on specific expertise and developer readiness. For multinational capability developments, set up larger multinational military formations to reinforce NATO's follow-on. FNC model received well model for NATO efforts. Lost momentum and disappeared from security conversations. Attempts to create unilateral formats failed to produce lasting results. Look for ad hoc approach. Unilateral flexible arrangements create options for larger multilateral organizations to act without constraint. Provide opportunities for capable to take action. Fill readiness and political gaps. Foster greater interoperability. Multilateralism and flexibility are key. Otherwise, NATO's current rigid structure will culminate in its collapse. Lucas at 22. War in Ukraine appeared to have new unity, but the honeymoon was brief. Chances are showing the alliance is shaky. Look closely and notwithstanding an apparent unity. NATO looks out of shape. The allies have been haggling over their concept. The divides are huge. Erdogan flirts with Russian fumes at Europe. Orban undermined pressure in Russia, Macron's and Scholz's foot track and created constant obstacles. Some countries favor a tough response. Others want dialogue. Others do nothing. And the NAC plead for delay and compromise. Most important in the alliance is the US. Nobody tremble at Spanish Dutch or Canadian displeasure. Result is dependence on US. Even new defense spending will not change the fact NATO structures do not reflect a balance of forces between the US and Europe. Problems are flexible. It does not mean they're anywhere near being fixed. NATO is unprepared for modern warfare. Given blocks will under structure and issues with key members, a more realistic vision which we can as a framework for most capable, and federal members to form coalitions of the willing. The British JEF network of multilateral ties with greatly strengthened alliances groupings would not supplant NATO but improve action and interoperability. Extinction. A withering NATO causes a litany of impacts. I'll lose 21. NATO becomes defunct due to death by 1,000 cuts, the erosion of the cohesion, will, credibility, and military capability, accelerated by nationalism, absence of the solution of countries prioritize national over multilateral solutions, tensions lead to open conflict between allies, including Greece and Turkey, allies do China's bidding, adversarial actors test with incidents, Russia breached Lithuania's territorial integrity, sensing NATO's weakness, China mounts trauma offensives to secure markets, countries are receptive, while Europeans install security, countries become nationalists and protectionists, national leaders escape both multinational organizations, walk away from movements on climate action, uncontrolled human rights or ignore obligations to the EU, and damaging credibility of leaks. Heated against the rebel, its ability to adapt, raising ambition without cohesion, undermining alliances. If the US leadership is absent, NATO will find itself on a negative trajectory. Next off is the cohesion disadvantage. Cohesion is at an all-time high, but contingent collaboration is needed to make progress sustainable. Easily 10-12. NATO cohesion never been higher. Europe building to us and armed forces interoperability needed for NATO, sending a strong message to Russia, key deterrence. War in Ukraine deterrent need for combined approach. Ukraine given NATO insight into challenges of sustainment, solvable if you collaborate and make a dedicated effort. Alliance bureaucracy and risk aversion stop greater emphasis on innovative technologies. The plan ruins unity. Harper 7-7. Shotgun is unambiguous, tricky to get 30 nations on side with every word and nuance. I would like innovative tech and interoperability is not intellectual horsepower, but hampers these, but rather alliance bureaucracy and risk aversion. Unrelated issues spill over and kill cohesion. Alahus 21. Allies moving away from a holding commitment, willing to pursue nationalist decisions, lack of respect and power in every nation for bilateral disputes. Hungary blocking Ukraine's membership action plan, Turkey blocked defense plan for Baltics, pointing to unity detail as a line of NATO as a whole, drift towards unity problem. Cohesion solves deterrence, terrorism, and democracy. Kolga 21. United NATO is critically important to protect incredible deterrence. Erosion of trust represents a threat. Russia perceived NATO as an atomized collection of states rather than a unified front. Alliances exposed to significant risk in its calculation. Gaps in cohesion direct and deterrence. Terrorist attacks, poisoning, cyber warfare, disinfo, military posturing all those threats. Undermining the world democracy and advancing authoritarianism. Democracy collapses an existential threat. Basu 21. With democratic norms freeing, Biden's right to war and challenges democracy and HR. Rising authoritarianism around the world poses an existential risk. Civilizations depend on norms, and these require deliberation and collective action. If civilization could collapse, we need to install post-socialist preferences. Digital time is causing huge change. Narcissism contributed to hyper-nationalism, fueling the rise of anti-democratic leaders who exploit disorderation. Go to the deterrence advantage. 1. They have no evidence that current systems are not effective. Their only example of a cyber attack was in a non-NATO country. 2. No impact of cyber attacks. Estonia was easily able to repel a series of Russian cyber attacks last summer because of their strong defensive capabilities. Higgins in 22. Estonia repelled the biggest wave of cyber attacks in more than a decade. The cyber attacks by the Russian hacker group were the most severe since 2007. Estonia has a highly digitized economy and it's strengthened its cyber defenses. This week's assault has gone largely unnoticed, with websites remaining fully available. 3. Ukraine already destroyed Russia's military might, making an invasion impossible. Moscow 23. A decade ago, Moscow deliberately dismantled its army. In the early 1990s, Russian leaders began to reform and modernization processes. In 2008, the Russian military announced new look that intended to expand its retired officers, overhaul and training programs, and military education and allocating more funds. But the 2022 invasion of Ukraine exposed these reforms as insufficient. Russia's attempts to build better weapons did not translate into increased proficiency on the battlefield. Russia's military failures were high. There is little evidence that Russia modified its training programs ahead of its invasion. Russia deprived its soldiers of the appropriate skills and required appropriate maintenance. The military is plagued by missing supplies. 4. The possibility of a Baltic invasion is vanishingly small. Putin's troops are already in Ukraine. Kramer 928. Moscow peeled forces away from bases in northern Europe to plug gaps. Of 30,000 troops, 80% have diverted, leaving with only a skeleton. The drawdown is very significant. Russian forces just gone. Russia's moving hardware away to moves S-300s. One basing area appeared to be abandoned. The military threat to the Baltic region is obviously low. There's a shortage of soldiers. Conscripts are undertrained and poorly equipped. Clever are poorly equipped. 5. NATO's robust defense of the Baltic countries already protects them from Russian aggression. Commercio, an assistant professor of political science at 22. The most important factor is that the Baltic countries are from Ukraine and their membership is NATO. An attack against one member nation is deemed an attack against all members. The Baltic states require to guarantee collective defense of their countries. NATO's values of the UK, Germany, and the US are combat ready, demonstrating the strength. 6. A2AD sends mixed signals to adversaries like Russia, destroying any hope for deterrence. Doherty in 20. A2AD sends a variety of vague conflicting signals. It has become a junk drawer into which analysts have turned virtually every Russian challenge. Rather than a coherent understanding of every serious problem, A2AD has become a jumble. 7. No Russia war. Sarazan 20. Russia's Cuban crisis is the risk of it so high. I doubt this what keeps Russia from war. Lies in agreements. There have been between Moscow and Washington to prevent danger. These include incidents, these, and 89 agreement. NATO have similar. Go to the assurances advantage. 1. The US has assured our Baltic allies that we are committed to our defense. Lee 22. U.S. Secretary of State Blinken assured Lithuania and Latvia of NATO protection. He made visits to the 3 Baltic states. Biden is aiming to keep calm any fears about security. The United States more committed than ever. He stressed that NATO is what deserves permanent troops in the Baltics. We will defend every inch of NATO territory. 2. Their evidence is solving Baltics invasions includes preventing hate speech, disinformation, and Russian trolls. The plan does not do that. 3. No prolif cascades and no impact. Schneider 20. Bomb stabilizing despite risk contribute to log peace. Prolif is very robust, malicious, and disruptive. The net effect is quite small. Spread never untaken, remain well below weapons threshold. Efforts span years. Embarked not acquired, owing tech and institutional management challenges. Nations failed, several undertaken nuclear reversal of any activities. Specifically, European pro-lift threat is overhyped. Heating 22. 9 countries possess nukes, testament to robust norms and penalties in place to prevent their spread. It's very difficult to build an expensive and exposes the country to international sanctions, isolation, and military strikes. 30 countries have pursued a nuclear and never got there. It is illogical to have NATO go through an entire consensus procedure when we could do so in other methods. Something like a framework nations concept, which would avoid all of the risks of a cohesion disadvantage. But ultimately, it is ludicrous that the notion that Russia would suddenly invade the Baltics with a large-scale cyber attack or infrastructure, making it better that you vote for the negative ideas that avoid NATO's bureaucracy. I'm open for cross-examination.
Okay. The framework nations concept, does the United States bilaterally work with every NATO member state?
No, the framework nations concept is a multilateral framework.
It's mini-lateral.
Or minilateral, sorry.
What does that mean?
That means that, or you missed one, sorry.
Basically, the arts and keel evidence describes how it's more flexible than NATO's current bureaucratic process that currently goes through the North Atlantic
Yeah, so
Council.
instead of consensus, it just requires some NATO member states to say yes?
Well,
Yeah,
it works through it works through groupings of NATO member nations. Instead
Okay,
of
so
countries.
what the counterplan does is it divides NATO into different sects. And it
It
has,
doesn't divide NATO. The counterplan text says that we would establish.
yeah,
a
but if
framework
you
nation
create
concept.
little mini groups within NATO that have different political leanings, different ideas about
No, so
whether or not to defend the
FNCs are
politics.
currently created like on minilateral groups, but there are also thematic FNCs, which is what the counterplan creates, like the Joint Expeditionary Force. The counterplan text mentions all members.
Okay,
of
so
NATO.
I
So
guess
those are
you've
the
got
ones-
evidence that they've been able to create small groups within NATO to do action. Our app is about all 31 now, member states defending the Baltics, where have you read evidence that the framework nations concept can work with all 31 member states?
Well, the arts and keel evidence is specific to the fact that NATO can work with all of these countries in their entirety. The evidence says that we're able to establish the same level of deterrence.
yeah, but I
as
don't
far as they're able to work
understand
with
what's the
these countries.
distinction between the counterplan and the plan then at that point.
The
If you include
counterplan
all
is
of
a
them,
pick
works
out of
with
NATO's bureaucratic processing.
okay, so it just picks out a consensus rule, allows each member state to do its own thing.
Well, no, they
No,
would
not
still
doing
be
its own
part
thing.
of the FNC. They would just not go through consensus. Like,
Okay. The cohesionist ad, your easily card says that, quote, militaries in Europe are more willing to invest in their armed forces by modernizing equipment, replenishing stocks, and improving training methods. That is the app. Why do you think that's a link to that?
Wait, these are questions asking.
It says that militaries in Europe are now more willing than ever to invest in their armed forces. That's what the app does.
that's status quo descriptive. That's not.
Yeah, and it's descriptive of how NATO would like the plan. Why do you think it
The
means
app is
operating down
sending new
cohesion?
A280 forces to the Baltics.
It's another level of forces that is different. On
It's a
lower
level
scale,
of
already sent that out.
replenishing stocks and modernizing equipment.
That's not what.
If you need this card, what it's saying is that NATO allies are scared of Russia and they want stronger defenses against Russia. That's what the app does. Why do you think this is a disadvantage to the app?
No, that's different insofar as the affirmative actually does other things like go through the consensus procedure. All of that would lead to fragmentation of NATO allies, which is one independent link.
Your link
But
card
the
is
other-
written on July 7th. Finland was just entered into NATO by the consensus rule. Why do you think the consensus principle means that every action
Yeah, the
fails?
Finland negotiations that occurred over the past year were all expected and priced in. They're all things that were
Priced in?
expected by NATO. It was something that NATO already had negotiations over that were already expected in the political squabbles that they agreed over. This is something that throws a wrench in that whole disagreement processes with the consensus procedure.
I forgot to start my timer.
It's 3 minutes.
The order is the deterrence advantage, the assurance advantage, T consensus, T subsets, the fragmentation counterplan, and finally the cohesion disadvantage. Is anyone not ready? Okay. Are you also good?
Yeah.
Okay. The problem with all of the negatives grandstanding about no invasion now is that we have presented evidence from today that says that Putin and Russia are the Baltic states' existential threat, that they have placed nuclear submarines in the Baltic Sea, ICBMs in Kaliningrad, troops to the border, and they will invade the Baltics as a diversionary tactic to divert from the protracted war that is going on in Ukraine. The difference between Ukraine and the Baltics are that the Baltics are much smaller with far fewer troops, with far fewer ability to defend itself, which means that the Baltics are not defended now. There is insufficient capabilities now, and Putin will invade now because only we have evidence from today, while their evidence is outdated and from last year. Additionally, they have conceded that artificial intelligence is necessary for Baltics defense. Even if there are some successes in cybersecurity, artificial intelligence is necessary for early warning and early detection systems. Furthermore, the evidence is about what the Baltics are doing, not what NATO is doing, but our evidence says that the only way for Article 5 to be guaranteed is if NATO's actions send a strong signal of support. They say that the troops in Russia are being destroyed now, but their evidence actually goes the other way because the officials of Russia actually stress that the Air Force hasn't changed and that the Northern Fleet is untouched and that the troops are remaining in the Baltic region, which means that invasion is still likely. The assurance advantage. Their evidence is far too old. There's no assurance now because the Ukraine invasion has shown that NATO is not doing enough to assure our allies, especially since NATO is only doing the bare minimum for the Baltic states in the status quo. Our internal link is not about disinformation, but about a Baltic invasion. Yes, proliferation, and yes, impact of proliferation. Our evidence is hyper-specific and says that absent protecting the Baltics, wildfire proliferation will spread across our allies, which causes miscalculation, increases use-lose pressures, and guarantees extinction. Key consensus. 1, we meet textually, Pantex in a vacuum is most objective. 2, function. We meet the plan cooperates solely with NATO. 3, counter to NATO means its organizations, not a 17 alliance can function without full agreement of members NEC, and the agencies are NATO. NATO is a separate entity from its member states and enjoys autonomy. 4, predictability. Our evidence comes from a person defining the international legal structure of NATO. 6, 5, limits. Our interp is best for AFGround because their interp makes it impossible since we have to be able to answer cheaty bilateral counterplans like the FNC counterplan. 6, reasonability, key to quality of debates and predictability. 7, functional limits, NATO key, DoD key, and a series of other counterplans like process counterplans check. The affirmative, key subsets. 1, we apply cyber holistically. 2, we meet Pantex in a vacuum. 3, counter term in the area of means approximately Cambridge Dictionary in the area of approximately. 4, over limiting, it means the topic only has 3 affirmatives. 5, pigs kill every F. 6, functional limits, classified out from above, and classified reasonability as well. The FNC counterplan. 1, permutation to both. If they're right that mini-lateral initiatives solved, then that can shield the link by using the resources and by generating consensus through mini-lateral approaches. 2, do the counterplan, classify the definitions from topicality. 3, they've misunderstood the framework nations concept. Their implementation of FNC will fail. Article 21, FNC flexible format within NATO enables individual framework nations to work with set of other members to fill capability gaps, more formal groupings and commitments than plus and model, combined resources, decreasing redundancies, structured coordinated approach relying on the alliances organizational structure. 4, here's evidence to further substantiate the sovereignty deficit. Tardy 23, alliances undermined whenever an alternative competes, no credible alternative emerged. EU ad hoc bilateral source of disunity, damage, duplication on NATO centrality, NATO undermined by substitutes at the expense of the Atlantic Alliance. 5, operating outside of NATO structure is far worse and causes fragmentation. Arts and KO 21, groupings outside NATO structures pose challenges, create redundancies, amplify divisions, eroding larger endeavors, create questions of NATO's existing approach. As confronts complex global landscape, effective agenda will be more important than ever. Reassess the purpose to demonstrate alliance's relevance as a primary forum for Euro-Atlantic security. 6, cross-sects just to dismantle this counterplan. They have no explanation of how bilateral initiatives will be able to effectively communicate with our allies and be able to generate consensus. 7, the counterplan generates uncertainty because it's a whole new process which decimates assurance and deterrence. Anderson 13, any change to U.S. strategies, regardless of how effective, lead allies to question whether their status has changed in the eyes of U.S. leaders, wonder if their concerns are still important to Washington, and conclude views not deemed important. U.S. deterrence and assurance operate within a complex network of relationships. Any changes cascade throughout the entire system, give rise to uncertainty in their country, adversaries, whether U.S. remain reliable and predictable partners. 8, the counterplan is insufficient to solve the net benefit and also links to the cohesion disadvantage because our arguments prove how this mini-lateral approach will create more fragmentation, will cause NATO to fail even more. So you should not try to sacrifice the traditional, well-worn strategy that has worked in the status quo for one that is completely new. the cohesion disadvantage. One, non-unique NATO disunity over security guarantees cause fast proliferation in the status quo. Current communication is siloed and enclave, which guts interoperability and triggers miscalculation. Two, turn the app solves the disadvantage. This is a thesis of the entire affirmative, that we need to be more focused on the issues that are important. Their evidence themselves says that we need to focus on Eastern European allies like the Baltics, which means that they have read an add-on for the affirmative, and the affirmative straight turns this disadvantage. Three, NATO can spearhead quick adoption of emerging technologies that reduces use of resources and disagreement correlating innovative typeface dilemma. The NATO future will only be feasible if the connectivity is socialized. NATO functions as a key hub of socialization process that trains and educates member states by creating consensus for a way forward. NATO forces as a whole step into the future. Four, condos, voter fairness. Our interp deters proliferation of overpowered counterparts. Quality of debates discourages offense, obstructs testing, and causes late-breaking rounds. Our interp is one, unconditional counterplan. Five, consensus. Consensus is better for cohesion. Kaluba 22. Unanimity on every issue is impossible. Debate and disagreement are features, not bugs. It's astounding how often NATO does reach consensus. The opposite of consensus is not failure. A consensus process, particularly its ability to build a common understanding amongst members, is invaluable. Habits of consultation and info sharing create the foundation. In the absence of agreement, the ability to collectively define threats is immensely valuable. These habits of co-op give NATO members the flexibility to act outside of the alliance. While NATO does much by consensus, the skills it helps members develop essential to enabling separate coalitions. 6. AI-enabled exercises and A3AD solve unity frank. 21. Military AI includes non-controversial uses such as sustainment, which encompasses logistics. AI makes services more efficient and cost-effective. Translated co-op in this field is uncontroversial but extremely useful, especially when carried out in NATO. This could bring allies closer together, establish joint procedures, and ensure interoperability. 7. Ukraine made the affirmative uniquely popular. Tool 22. NATO posture reset, if properly and promptly executed, could greatly reduce the potential for Russian fait accompli against the Baltic states as well as deter aggression against others. Presently, it's broadly supported among NATO because of Ukraine. 8. The democracy causes. Obviously, NATO alone is not able to ensure democracy. Countries like Turkey, Poland, and a series of other rise of populism means that democracy, they cannot solve democracy. 9. Maritime war, Russian mining causes NATO-Russian wars. Only Japan is able to solve. Heard 11 and 14, Russia laying mines. NATO connect opposite of Baltic Seas. Mines cause uncertainty. NATO must be clear about those waters at the level 4. NATO response to Russian use of mines. Spark full-scale conflict. This will not dissuade Russia. There are no red lines in Russian strategy. NATO needs to invest in demining capability throughout the Baltic Sea. A2AD becomes a key to controlling the conflict. NATO assistance from outside the Baltics is critical. Kaliningrad's proximity to all Baltic Sea nations presents great danger. I'm open for cross-examination.
Can you send that maritime thing?
It's in the doc.
Where?
Under the turns.
I don't see it.
Oh, here it is. Okay, alright.
Alright, are we good for cross items?
Yeah.
I wanted to first talk about the Baker evidence in the 1AC. It says, quote, the 3 Baltic states each host a multinational battle group ranging in size from between 1,400 to 1,900 troops. They also have tanks, armored fighting vehicles, heavy artillery pieces, and other military hardware. What does the affirmative need to do in order to secure these Baltic nations, who already have a plethora of military expertise on their side?
You're reading a straw person argument from Baker. Baker also says that Russian aggression is likely in the status quo because even though there are some tanks, even though there are some troops, that these numbers are far too small to actually deter the third greatest power from invading Ukraine.
Troop sizes by?
The affirmative is not about troop sizes, but about ensuring that the Baltic states have the necessary emerging technologies and the high technology capabilities able to signal to Russia that an invasion would mean failure. These technologies include, for the cybersecurity component of the affirmative would have a whole of government approach where all of the Baltic states are systematically improved in their cyber defenses, we harden the defenses. This includes their government information and network systems that Russia has recently tried hacking. This includes the A2AD systems that require inputs of data, which means that we have to secure against data poisoning. This includes critical infrastructure, which our 1AC internal link evidence says will preface a Russian invasion. As for the artificial intelligence components
all those
of
things about like emerging technology protection seem to be about cybersecurity or cyber attacks that occur on our infrastructure. What stops then Putin from like literally kinetically invading the Baltics, which is what your entire argument is?
Again, 1AC evidence is especially clear that before an invasion occurs, Russia will try to undermine the Baltics' cybersecurity to allow them to create vulnerabilities within the Baltics.
Okay,
If
so
the
your
Baltics are
argument
super
is that-
secure, that means that Russia will not be able to cause tensions or cause vulnerabilities within the Baltics before an invasion. Furthermore,
So Russia will only invade the Baltics if they see a cyber asymmetry.
yes, that is one of our warrants. The second argument is that we also provide artificial intelligence capabilities to the Baltics. The Lucas evidence explains how, and the Russian evidence explain how artificial intelligence has to be incorporated in the A280 systems, which means that early warning and earlier detection capabilities would have the ability to process lots of data.
What stops adversaries from poisoning these data systems when you're using
Cybersecurity.
AI?
That's what we just said.
Okay, so like
Cybersecurity
what
would-
cyber defenses do you specifically do that prevent the data poisoning of these certain systems?
there will be multiple layers of cyber hardening. It would ensure that
Okay, so like
the
multiple
advers-
layers of cyber hardening. Like what does that do to stop like adversaries from breaking through and finding new vulnerabilities to exploit?
they can't break through because our evidence says that NATO has super advanced cyber capabilities, but they have not deployed these in the Baltics because we have presented uniqueness evidence that in current levels are insufficient. The plan would change
If
that.
it's really true that Putin's going to invade the Baltics imminently because of a cybersecurity disadvantage, then why hasn't NATO already supplied all of these troops, so supplied all these materials in order to improve the infrastructure?
Well, why didn't we stop the Ukraine war? The fact of the matter is that Putin is willing to invade countries at will, and he will do so in the Baltics unless we do more to protect them.
All right, let's cross that.
Correct. Yeah, that was a minute 15. The order is just a counterclaim. You have the doc?
Yeah.
All right. NATO is an organization constantly undermined by bureaucracy. It took NATO a year just to admit one country into the alliance, and there are still debates about the admission of another. NATO is an organization that needs to operate by consensus. That means literally every single member of NATO needs to agree to a policy. Anything else, and that policy fails. The question you need to ask yourself in this debate is that if the Baltics are really so at risk, if there's going to be an imminent invasion right now, why should we continue to operate through that delayed structure that is going to continue to collapse NATO? The counterplan solves the ask by establishing a framework nation concept over Baltic cybersecurity. It solves because FNCs are flexible minilateral groupings of NATO countries that operate through NATO's command structure, which solves all of the NATO keywords, but they remain independent of its legal structure and consensus-based voting process. The threshold for deficits that Peninsula needs to read in this round is consensus key. The problem is that none of the cards mentioned in the 2AC have the word consensus. FNCs induce broad NATO follow-on by creating intra-alliance momentum, which is the arts evidence. there are some large framing issues on this counterplan that should make it a lot easier to vote negative. Firstly, they've conceded that NATO follows on. That means all of their deficits as to why NATO is key for deterrence will be solved after they follow on to the counterplan. We would start with an FNC as a baseline framework, and then NATO countries would join afterwards. 2, they've conceded that NATO collapse is inevitable absent the counterplan. The 1NC evidence explicitly said that NATO's rigid bureaucratic structure is going to be the death knell of the alliance due to its rigidity. The Lucas evidence one conceded. That means that you can vote negative on presumption in this debate if you do not vote for the counterplan, because the affirmative literally won't matter if NATO immediately collapses. These were both arguments flagged in the 1NC that went dropped. You should also defer to the sufficiency framing because a small 1% risk of the net benefit outweighs any minor unquantifiable solvency deficits. Choice 1 was perm do both. It fails. A is momentum. A successful FNC requires full commitment to recover lost momentum and reintroduce its viability into the international dialogue. Empirics prove that duplicative measures sap American dedication, which caused the FNC to fail. Saxy 16. FNC new approach to cooperation initiatives in the shadow of imminent crisis of the day, such as Ukraine and Ukrainian refugees. B is duplication. It guts mini-lateral frameworks within NATO. Empirics prove. Arts and Kiel 21. Ad hoc approaches challenge NATO, risk duplicating NATO efforts, support concern mini-lateral formats address this concern, ensure mini-lateral complement rather than compete with. NATO can apply less and a more flexible approach. C is identity. FNCs need a distinct political and perceptual identity. The permutation lumps the FNC with NATO to erode trust and credibility. Monaghan and Arnold 22. Develop a political identity. Foundations enable the formation of identity. Develop political cohesion through strategic communication. Political identify can have powerful effects. Example of provision of assurances happen quickly, built with trust. Choice 2 was perm to the counterplan. Severance creates a moving target and unpredictably redefines a plan which results in no negative fiat, voted for fairness and clash. 1 is that counterplans can compete either textually or functionally. It's the least arbitrary since we ensure that both there are 2 angles of attack to maximize negative flexibility. 2 is NATO. The permutation severs out of it. We'll concede the we meet argument from topicality that says that they go through NATO. The now to evidence is our argument. It says that all NATO operations are decided upon by the North Atlantic Council and talks about how NATO's distinct international legal personality. The counterplan can access NATO's command structure, but cannot access its political structure. The deficits they can get are consensus key, which means they are still guaranteed ground. FNCs are also independent political military entities. Monaghan and Arnold 22. FNCs evolve via aims set by NATO to become a political military entity in its own right, provide inspiration to acting in NATO obligations, bring the rational expectations to NATO. Sweden and Finland join adding another dimension by bringing non-NATO members into the framework. C. Even if they win that FNCs are part of NATO, treat the counterplan as a pick out of consensus because the means they cooperate with all parts. Court of Appeal 16. Use a definite article restricts court's interpretation of the language. The word the refers to all duties. It would be unreasonable to construe the to mean some or any. 3 is security cooperation. The counterplan picks out of increase, which means to expand already existing cooperation. Buckley 6. Increase means to make something greater. Must have an existing to be compared. Definition must be respected. Presuppose an already existing policy. Increase applied to already existing policy. 4 is follow-on. The counterplan does not mandate security cooperation over the Baltics, and NATO follow-on is an effect of the counterplan. Result is certain. OED 89. Free from that. Fixed settle. So is should. Neither 9. Express obligation, wit of authority, favor interpreting should, and imperative obligatory sense of expression synonymous with the word must. Our model is best for ground and precision. If they don't have to defend consensus with their plan text, they can link out of say no, NATO trade-off, the Violet counterplan, the cohesion DA, and tons of other things that they can all link out of because they no longer have to defend consensus. Now, the deficits. The framing issue on all of them is they conceded follow-on. Establishing a thematic FNC amount in emerging tech creates the operational capacity that spurs follow-on. Monaghan and Arnold 22. FNC thematic specialization challenging a given tendency to avoid relying on giving up on force. FNCs offer flexible to alleviate sensitivities. FNC provide operational deployable capability. FNC allows neo-overheatings for collaboration. Core specialist capabilities act as a precursor to developing formalized structures with NATO. Now, the first cards that they've read are talking about operating outside of NATO's structures, but the counterplan would still access NATO's command structure, which is the backbone of the alliance. Maker 22. Command structure military backbone of the alliance. Defense ministers establish SIAC as part of command structure, integrating capabilities into military operation planning. FNCs would actually close critical capability gaps and appropriate existing NATO structures and resources. Plummer 17. FNC critical importance of capability gaps address the ability to act in international crisis sampling and packaging. Highly combat-ready forces groupings built upon pre-existing mechanisms and structures such as NATO smart defense groups. Arrangement core of dynamic hub. Will also turn the deficit. Consensus requirements gut solvency. A's delay. Consensus means the plan takes 16 years. Cook and Dow 22. The challenge would be consensus-based structure as well as efforts and interest. NATO capabilities require an average of 16 years for development to delivery. B is Turkey. Empirics prove that Erdogan exploits consensus to hold NATO hostage. Crowley and Erlanger 530. Within consensus, Turkish strongman and stick-up-artist in 2009 block chief from Denmark prevented the lines from working for 6 years. Delayed for months, planned to fortify Eastern Europe, protectionist Sweden and Finland, reminder of long-festering problem for NATO. Authoritarian leader willing to block consensus. C is backlash. Bureaucratic politics cause consensus voting to gut solvency. Bazin and Cordonova 18. NATO's rigid processes enable to evolve as interest. Bureaucratic policies cause NATO's slow adaptation. Civil military restriction, effective readiness, decision-making process prevent the lines from developing framework for action and addressing adversaries such as cyber. They need to find compromise with decision-making. D is rigidity. Remember they've conceded the Lucas card that says that the inflexible consensus-based structure of NATO will enable spoilers like Turkey and Hungary to deck alliance effectiveness and split threat perception. They say that the counterplan will fragment NATO. This is a misunderstanding of the counterplan. The counterplan text includes all 31 member NATO nations and says that those would all be part of the FNC, meaning it is not a minilateral grouping. Previous FNCs have been in minilateralism, but the new FNC would be a thematic FNC, such as the Joint Expeditionary Force that would include all NATO members and would not deck solvency. The Arts and Kiel evidence they've read is our solvency advocate, and they're talking about bilateral structures and the European Union, which is not our argument. They talk about bilat, which is not our card. The Anderson evidence about creating uncertainty was turned above. Going through consensus decks certainty even more, because bureaucracy tells the Baltics that we are not truly ready to commit them because we're willing to go through this bureaucratic process. Lastly, the internal net benefit. They say that you can't solve the internal net benefit because minilateralism will lead to fragmentation. But as explained above, that's a misinterpretation. A successful FNC would revive the loss of momentum for minilateral arrangements within NATO that broadly solves NATO rigidity by creating a flexible environment. That also turns the case because of sustainability and the necessity of consensus and cohesion in order to ensure that the Baltics are deterred and that we have a credible signal of deterrence against our adversaries like Russia.
Are you good for cross-examination?
Yeah.
This thematic coalition of all 31 NATO member states, how many member states have to say yes to do the plan?
Well, the FNC is voluntary, and so that means that countries choose whether they want to join it. If you had to say no deficit in the 2AC, I had a whole slate of cards that I could have had to answer that. That deficit was not made.
So, the United States would offer NATO allies to join this brand new alliance framework, and then
Well, it's
countries,
not brand new, it's been implemented in the past, it just didn't have enough momentum, but yeah.
it didn't have enough momentum.
Because the US didn't show a credible commitment.
And what does a credible commitment look like?
The US
To the
clearly
campaign?
saying that it is willing to work through the FNC.
Okay. What does the process of follow-on look like?
Well, it would mean the Arts and Kiel evidence actually says, quote, the FNC was received well, can be a model for future NATO efforts. Quote, it can set up larger multilateral military formations to reinforce NATO's follow-on forces.
Okay, so it's like what specifically does it look like?
So basically, it would start with the FNC, and then NATO countries would then choose to go through consensus after the FNC is successful.
Okay, so all 31 NATO member states would think that the FNC was successful, and then all 31 member states would carry out the plan in a consensus vote?
Yeah, after the FNC is passed.
Okay, so, all right.
Again, this deficit wasn't made in the 2AC, otherwise I would have.
I'm not sure what you're talking about, but I'd like to ask about permutation to the counterplan. Your definition of NATO say that NATO includes North Atlantic Council, but it also includes other organizations, including the command structure, including political structures. You've said the FNC is part of the command structure. Why is this not an example of NATO?
Then we're a pick out of the non-command structure sections of NATO.
Okay, so the only definition you have going for you is a definition of duh.
No,
That's just
we also have
means all.
definitions of resolved should increase as well as the now to
Okay, yeah, let's talk about those as well.
Monaghan and Arnold evidence and conceded we meet arguments from topicality.
You said we meet Pantex in a vacuum.
That
But
was not the argument.
these definitions, so you've said increase means already existing cooperation. What about the counterplan is not already existing?
It establishes a new framework nation concept, which was the counterplan.
You said there already are framework nation concepts.
So there have been framework nation concepts over different issues. The counterplan would establish a framework
Well, the
nation
plan is
concept
also a new issue.
over the
cooperation.
Baltics. No, the plan is in order to be topical, you have to increase existing cooperation. So current forces that are
This
sent
seems like an
to
absurd
the
interpretation of
Baltics.
the topic. What about the
We would
counterplan
argue
is
that-
not security cooperation?
Sorry, what?
What about the counterplan is not security cooperation?
The counterplan is not an increase in security cooperation
Why?
because it establishes something new. It doesn't increase existing cooperation.
Okay, that's so absurd. And why is the counterplan not certain or immediate?
Follow-on is not certain or immediate.
Alright, but the counterplan is certain and immediate.
The counterplan itself is, but the follow-on to NATO is not.
Okay.
I'm sending it out. The webinar was sent. The order is the cohesion advantage.
Advantage?
Sorry, the cohesion disadvantage. The deterrence advantage, and then the assurance advantage.
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Yeah, the cohesion disadvantage. The deterrence advantage, and then the assurance disadvantage.
Okay.
Is anyone not ready? Alright, okay.
Yeah.
Are all the judges good? Okay.
Do you have content?
What?
Do you have content?
Actually, we'll take some credit.
Thanks.
Yes, we're taking credit.
It was on Condo the whole time. They just never asked.
Alright, no, it's 16 seconds. I'll insert condo on the cohesion disadvantage.
Okay.
That's what it was, right?
Yeah. That's why I said that. Alright, anyone not ready? Okay. Conditionality is good. We get home from the advocacies we read. ACE point is critical thinking. Where's the strategic choices and adaptation information? BC point is negative flexibility. The negative is always reactive. The active situation has infinite room to stick at 2C strategy. Condo restores competitive equity. PISA point is negative innovation. 2-1s are risk averse. Constraints discourage experimenting with novel argumentation because they're held at the mercy of the twist shenanigans. No fairness. It's non-unique because strat skew is terminally non-unique. We get more procedurals or disads. 2C critical thinking solves the impact better, and logical policy making outweighs. Their interpretation is wrong. Our interpretation, we meet their interpretation because the counterplan was unconditional the entire time. The disad. Concede all causes to democracy. That takes out the straight turn. There's no offense on the slow. The deterrence advantage. The notion that Russia is going to invade the Baltics because of an asymmetry in cybersecurity or artificial intelligence is ludicrous. If Russia is truly so revisionist and truly so avaricious that it's going to invade the Baltics, a few additional emerging tech protections won't do anything to stop Putin. You should filter this through cross-ex vagueness. When they just said we would add a few layers of cybersecurity protection, without specifying what those would look like or how that would actually improve deterrence. 1. Their evidence actually concedes that NATO has already taken numerous steps to address Baltics troops' presence. That is sufficient to solve the affirmative because it proves the status quo transatlantic commitment to ensure Baltic support. 1AC Baker 423. The 3 Baltic states each host a multinational battle group ranging in size from between 1,500 to 1,900 troops. They also have tanks, armored fighting vehicles, heavy artillery pieces, and other military hardware. Battle groups are multinational and combat ready, demonstrating the strength of the transatlantic bond. NATO is committed to defend every inch of Allied territory. We are adjusting our presence in light of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. We doubled the number of battle groups in the eastern part of the alliance, put 40,000 troops under NATO command, deployed more jets and warships, and we are increasing the number of our high readiness forces to several hundred thousand. How exactly NATO's presence could best be boosted is likely to be discussed at NATO's upcoming annual summit in July. This piece of evidence not only demonstrates the significant troop deployments to the Baltics region, but also demonstrates that how exactly we can improve it is something that will be discussed in the Vilnius summit later in July. 1NC2, no impact to cyber attacks. You should extend the 1NC Higgins evidence. They extend several warrants. Countries like Estonia already have digitalized cyber economies and repel numerous waves of cyber attacks in the past. Only our evidence cites empirical examples. Their evidence doesn't. Our piece of evidence from Higgins says that Russian hacks by Killnet, for example, were filtered through sufficient Estonian defenses. After 2007 and crippling attacks on Estonian defenses, it now developed the third strongest cybersecurity system in the world. That proves that Baltic countries already have sufficient defenses right now. 1NC3. Ukraine invasion means that Russia won't attack the Baltics. Russia's attempts to build better weapons and improve training did not translate into increased proficiency on the battlefield. Our piece of evidence cites the story of Russia's military capabilities. In 2008, Russia decided to remove military on different grounds. But ultimately, the Ukrainian invasion proved that there were several different loopholes that failed. Putin is irrational, but he's not dumb. He knows that he'll trigger Article 5, or NATO's part, a component of their treaty, for the 1NC commercial evidence. That piece of evidence says that if Putin does decide to invade the Baltics, he knows that he'll face a full-scale invasion, or rather retaliation, by all 31 member nations, because that's sufficient to cause an attack on all of the regions. The framing issue for this argument is that the affirmative team has read no empirical examples of cyber attacks in the past, and in cross-examination had only vague explanations of what cyber attacks impacts would look like. Next, extend 1 and C7, no Russia war. Half a dozen military agreements establishing the Cold War prevented it. That's SARS done. 2, their impact starts at 0.38%. Rodriguez 19. I get a sense of a probable nuclear war by people looking at historical evidence, use of experts and predictions made by forecasters. If we aggregate those perspectives, the chances of a nuclear war between the US and Russia are around 0.38%. 3, that doesn't go nuclear. Roscoe 17. Ever lower threshold is weaker by the day. Threshold was from a lack of conventional capabilities, while Russia is rapidly improving. Difficult to understand why Russia would risk a confrontation with NATO. Putin does not appear suicidal. Russia is less likely to use nukes. Official doctrine confirms this increased range of options. Cut the credit options. Go to the assurance advantage. Will extend no prolif impact. The bomb isn't stabilizing because cascades are limited by a robust non-prolif regime. Most states fail to obtain the bomb because of tech and institutional barriers. That's the Schneider evidence. The notion that proliferation will occur as a result of a failure of Putin's invasion is ludicrous.
The card that the Baltics will solve comes from 2018.
Moreover, all the evidence they read is from 2018, saying that the Baltics would fail in those regards, not accounting for the fact that recent developments have made the Baltics regions stronger. 2, there's no impact. Mueller in 20. Proliferation pace slow, weapons convey little consequences, benign, cost substantial. Alarm is wrong for decades about proliferation. Doesn't technology capable of fear if you've done so. Countries gone astray. Huge number and neglect opportunity. Canada, Italy, Norway, South Korea back by reverse, South Korea, Africa surrendered. No technological imperative like military powers in general. Weapons not proved to be crucial. How much more status would Japan have? Cut the card at half. 3. The nuclear domino theory has been debunked. Edelstein and Schifrin in 18. Academic literature has turned against it. Several decades of pessimistic proliferation has proven embarrassingly wrong by history. Consistent among authors, Farrell threat is imminent or likely to involve chain reaction. Cut the card at chain reaction. Zeroing the case means that we've zeroed all solvency deficits that he could read on the counterclaim. Which means even if they want a solvency deficit, it means that that's zero.
I'm gonna use the restroom.
top prep 446 left.
How much do we have left? 6:30?
Because I can't raise it.
Yeah, I think we like work. I can't raise it otherwise.
Kevin ran to the bathroom.
Why is everything blocked on this Wi-Fi?
It's like everything for debate, like Dropbox, Messenger.
I can't even do my homework.
Oh.
I mean, look, I gave up my entire weekend to judge, okay? Life doesn't stop for debate.
Were they gonna have the debate?
No, I mean, I don't know actually. Because I thought, like, okay.
Because at first there was like.
Yeah, no, I saw judges
Yeah.
too. I was like, oh, I don't know. Because when we're like at like squalls and like nap calls and
Yeah.
stuff, like state calls and nap calls
Yeah.
and stuff, Bellarmine like has like us debate like after. So
okay.
it's usually probably about that.
Yeah.
Who's supposed to be in the panel?
What? I don't know. I was in the list I have, so like, oh wait, no, it's for this.
Yeah. Alright. Is everyone? Oh, deterrence, assurance, cohesion, dissent, fragmentation, kind of thing.
Give me 1 sec.
Right.
Got it.
Is everyone good to go? Cool.
Oh, is there cards?
No.
Okay.
They say emerging tech fails. This is unresponsive. It's not about necessarily defeating a Russian invasion of the Baltics, but the fact that the plan will create a strong signal of deterrence that causes Russia to not invade. Our evidence indicates that currently Russia does not trust NATO's signal of deterrence in the region because NATO has not committed enough resources to the region, so Russia thinks that NATO will not come to the Baltics' aid. By giving AI and cyber and the newest technologies, Russia will be scared off by NATO's presence. The re-highlighting of Baker is a straw person. Baker goes on to say that Baltics needs more support and that Russia is still moving troops and nukes to the border, which means that the re-highlighting is incorrect. Cyber defense is unresponsive. It's about the signal that's necessary to be provided by the plan, and the evidence is about one-off exercises that will occur, not about the overall necessary posture necessary to deter Russia. They've also forgotten about the other half of the plan about AI. Our evidence indicates that integrating AI into AT-AD systems are necessary for deterrence. The Russia defense and the no nuclear escalation group, it's too old and unresponsive. It's not specific to the Baltics. And our evidence analyzes Russian military doctrines and says that they have an explicit doctrine to use tactical nuclear weapons in the case of an invasion. Assurance. Yes, impact of proliferation and spread. The evidence is too old. Only we've had evidence from today as well as this year that says that Ukraine created a unique impetus for countries to get the bomb because they currently don't trust America's security guarantees, and that proliferation is bad because it causes user or loser pressures and miscalculation. The cohesion is that. They have dropped a straight turn to the counterplans internal net benefit. No new turn or answers because this was a clear internal return to everything they have said on the counter plan. They've conceded that the Baltics and defense of the Baltics is highly popular after Ukraine because NATO countries are currently worried about Russia's ability to invade the Baltics, and they've also conceded that AI is especially popular among NATO now because these NATO member states think that AI is a necessary component of defense against Russia. They've dropped to AC5 the Skapala evidence, which says that the consensus rule is necessary to effective cooperation and to consensus within NATO because it results in consultation and dialogue that's able to breed more cooperation with NATO, and it allows NATO to have a more cohesive response to NATO actions. This also straightens the argument under counterplan that says that NATO collapses now because it proves that we create the cohesion necessary to prevent a NATO collapse. This was 2AC5, 2AC6, and 2AC7 dropped in the 1NR. They also dropped 2AC9. Russia, absent a cohesive NATO starts Russia mining, which guarantees extinction. This is an impact to the straight turn that was dropped in the 1NR, so no new answers. And it also outweighs the counterplan, and the counterplan cannot solve it because it does not use the consensus rule, the FNC counterplan. None of their evidence is specific to the Baltics, which should be the framing issue in this round. There's a lot of evidence about how FNC might be good generally, but none of the evidence is specific to how the Baltics going through the consensus rule would be bad, because only we've read evidence that the Baltics is something that would garner consensus. It is something that all NATO member states will like. There's no NATO collapse post the plan, which was explained on the disadvantage because the plan would create cohesion and create a more efficient NATO. Permutation due to counterplan. Cooperating with NATO allies within the command structure is an example of the plan. First, just use your brain. When you say NATO, you do not mean the consensus rule. NATO means an organization of 31 allies, including the command structure. That's according to their evidence. Second is out ground. They make it impossible to be out. The whole argument is simply that we can still work with all of NATO. We just don't need approval to carry out the plan. That absorbs almost every app internal link. There's only a 40% app win rate in elim rounds, which means that allowing this counterplan would make that number even worse. Third is functional limits. They dropped DoD key checks. They also get bilateral counterplans that work outside of the command structure. Perms only need to be functionally legitimate because otherwise word picks are legitimate, which makes being out impossible. And our WeMeet arguments were, quote, pan text in a vacuum, and the pan cooperates solely with data. We have not conceded to their interpretations, which means that does not apply. Their other definitions do not apply. The counterplan does increase the pre-existing use of FNCs, and while consensus may not be immediate, the creation of the FNC is. The means one or more. United States District Court for Eastern District of Wisconsin 22. The does not introduce all or nothing proposition. The does not mean all, it just refers to one or more of the items. Except to AC5, the counterplan creates fragmentation, which also answers the follow-on arguments they explained at the top. This is their solvency advocate, the arts card, who goes affirmative. She indicates that breaking down NATO into many-lateral groups results in fights because these NATO member states that America cooperates individually with will not be talking with each other and will not create the consultation necessary to create the cohesion necessary for the affirmative. The cards that they read talking about delay and backlash in Turkey are not specific to the Baltics, which means they don't apply because only we have evidence that says that the Baltics uniquely creates a lot of impetus for cooperation. Even if the counterplan results in more flexibility, the new model creates uncertainty and it creates a lack of cohesion within the alliance, which our evidence says is necessary to a strong deterrent signal of Russia.
After the write our feedback and stuff, because I know last round we just had to answer the second review.
Yeah. Yeah.
Same for today.
I don't have my question. I'm sorry. I know I did octos, and I think that happened before we had this round.
Yeah. Our octus round was like we finished and we had like 10 minutes to make our decision and we had to like
Yeah. Yeah, no, we were the same way.
haven't said anything, so Sims are supposed to have started already, so obviously we're behind. Hopefully they just give us the care. I don't know how they expect us to like have no prep time with no decision time with like 2 hour kind of
Yeah, it's interesting.
How are you on the Russian mic?
rock, paper, scissors,
Yeah.
so they have time for finals.
Can you send the card on the?
What's that? Who's recording again? Can you send us the recording afterwards? Thanks.
Alright. The order is, okay, it'll be the counter plan. I guess we'll go to the dissent and back to the counter plan, and then case in order of deterrence issues.
Can you repeat that? Sorry.
Yeah, it'll be counter plan, dissent. The counter plan will just, okay, just an overview, the dissent, the counter plan, and then the case. But the overview would probably want to float on the counter plan.
Okay, so basically counterplan decide, counterplan case.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
All right, we're all good? Again, the dropped impact to the internal net benefit means it's try or die to establish an FNC and avoid the collapse of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. The one in Seattle evidence cites a host of accidental threats that would result from NATO collapse. Human rights violations, military invasions, climate change, arms control, and a whole laundry list of conceded impacts, all of which outweigh severely mitigated affirmative case. More importantly, the turns case arguments would function as an independent presumption level ballot. The one in C. Lucas evidence cites how NATO's rigid structure undermines unilateralism and flexibility, which culminates in its collapse. In other words, the alliance is unsustainable absent action over the counterplan. They can't solve either advantage because you can't send a credible signal of NATO deterrence or strengthen security commitments if the alliance does not exist in the first place. Now, go to the disadvantage. I'll answer the straight turn here because there's a huge conceptual issue they've made. They've made a link turn about why the Baltics are popular and why artificial intelligence is popular. That does not matter because the clear flag of the one in C. Lucas evidence is talking about NATO's rigid structure. In other words, the reason the alliance is going to collapse is because of its bureaucratic processes. The substance of the actual affirmative does not matter because the warrants for NATO collapse are about the bureaucratic process. In other words, the counterplan would also access this straight turn and increase cohesion because it also increased Baltic cooperation. However, the affirmative, by going through consensus, would deck any possibility for that to take place. The only card they ever have that even mentions a word about consensus on this link turn is the Skaluba evidence. But it doesn't address any of the 2&C warrants for why consensus is bad that were clearly flagged in the 2&C. In other words, they are going for consensus good while dropping all of our warrants for why consensus is bad. And all of their arguments for why cooperation over the Baltics is good are wholly irrelevant. Now, go to the counterplan. They've conceded sufficiency framing and the impact of the internal net benefit, which means it's impossible for them to win in substance. The only out is the permutation, but it's severance. They've only read one definition, which is the definition of the. Even if you don't like this counterplan, there are several core things that you cannot choose to avoid. They've conceded definitions of resolved, should, increase, NATO, and the Monaghan and Arnold evidence that says that FNCs are independent political military identities. All of things are things that they have chosen not to respond to, and the NAUDA evidence says that NATO operations are decided upon by the North Atlantic Council. They've also conceded all of the normative reasons as to why their model of debate would be bad. If the affirmative does not have to defend going through consensus, they no link out of say no, they no link out of consensus-based dissent, they link out of cohesion, any Turkey dissent, any violent counterplan, anything predicated on the consensus process, which is especially devastating for the negative on a topic where practically all disadvantages are thumbed. They've had one definition of the. That definition of the does not account for, it does not talk about how the can't refer to all parts, just says that the is not equal to one or more. In other words, the counterplan is a pick out of NATO's operational structure, but still accesses its command structure. They've conceded the Mager evidence that says that NATO's command structure is the backbone of the alliance. It is necessary for cooperation, and it accesses all of their NATO keywords. 40% AF win rates don't matter because that doesn't account for things like K-debate. Functional limits doesn't matter because the functional limits do not check anything if you do not get access to any dissents in the first place. The functional limits that do exist are taken out by their model of competition. That means that our model of debate is best for debate, as well as the fact that they've just conceded way too many definitions for them to have a winning argument here. The last argument were these fragmentation deficits. These were extremely not warranted out in the 1AR and basically conceded all of the 2&C. Fragmentation is solved by the counterplan because it's able to increase cooperation, but consensus leads to more fragmentation. A is delay. The Cook and Dowd evidence cites how consensus takes 16 years. B is Turkey, that talks about how empirics-proof Erdogan exploits consensus to hold NATO hostage. And C is backlash. Bureaucratic politics cause consensus meeting to gut solvency. Just because these cards are not specific to the Baltics does not matter, because these cards are about the process that the affirmative must necessarily go through, none of which were clearly adequately explained, and they've dropped all of the cards that were clearly flagged in the 2&C case. You should be able to vote negative on presumption. That means that it's the most real-world strategy for voting for debate. Even if you don't believe any of the arguments we've made on the counterplan, they will still argue that they've made some marginal thing, or might part some invention of the Baltics. But our model of debate is most real-world. Forcing the affirmative to have a plan solving most of their harms results in more in-depth research and better policy proposals, meaning that you should vote negative on it. The deterrence advantage that the only way it responds is to the nuanced case arguments in the block, or just this isn't specific to the app. There are two framing issues. Adding more layers of cyber defense is wholly insufficient if Putin is going to invade the Baltics anyway, and Putin won't invade the Baltics in the first place. If Putin invades NATO countries, he will trigger Article 5. All other arguments about miscalculation do not matter if Putin is not suicidal in the first place. We've already read evidence that defenses are sufficient right now. This also takes on the mining add-on because no Russian war answered this argument. Their card would culminate in a Russian war. And also they dropped the Juanino Rodriguez evidence that says their impact starts at 0.3%. The assurance evidence is also implicated by this advantage because it means there's no credible signal of deterrence and there are already security guarantees of the status quo.
Like the final vote, or like what speech are we on?
2 AR crap.
It's the last speech, yeah.
Okay, cool. All right.
Did you get the tab scan?
So I have to get messages, I can't send messages.
There's no service at all.
Yeah.
Can you step outside though?
Okay.
Goes from like 0 to 4 bars.
Oh.
time to write feedback. We just have to send it to Bellarmine.
There's supposed to be a chair that announces, even though we're not allowed to give feedback, but they did not set a chair, so I don't know how we're going to do that.
If someone sits, they can announce. Otherwise, we can figure it out.
Is anyone not ready? Oh, the order is the assurance advantage, the deterrence advantage, the FNC counterplan, and the disadd stuff will be on the counterplan. Is anyone not ready? All right. Wildfire nuclear proliferation is incoming. The United States has insufficiently guaranteed and signaled to allies that they are willing to listen to and assist the most weakest chain in the league, the Baltic states, with whatever they need. They got to this page after the timer ended, which means that it's try or die affirmative to prevent nuclear proliferation, which causes use or lose pressures, collapses, causes miscalculation, and guarantees nuclear war. You should be more worried about countries with nuclear weapons and human rights violations that may occur absent the counterplan, which means that the affirmative impacts outweigh the disadvantage, the counterplan, the deterrence advantage. We're not going for disadvantage. You cannot vote negative on presumption because they have dropped the assurance advantage. Only the affirmative is able to assure our allies by sending a strong signal that we are willing to support our Baltic allies and we'll do everything we can to defend them. The counterplan. The counterplan solves close to none of the affirmative. They've answered the fragmentation component of the solvency deficit, but not the uncertainty or assurance component of the deficit. The mini-lateral counterplan is absurd because it definitely triggers the disadvantage. You cannot ghost, this is like very logical. You do not ghost a well-established group chat and just randomly attempt to create a completely new group chat when the group chat has existed for 70 years. To forgo the established 70-year legacy of the NATO framework and to invent a new mode of communication where the US proposes a new mode of alliance network and conducted, including all of these allied militaries independently, would create uncertainty, decimating assurance, and deterrence. These allies would be thinking, why is the US foregoing the time-tested, age-old strategy of seeking binding dialogue through consensus with all of us? What is the US trying to pull here? What kind of implications does this have for the future? They'll be thinking that the US is trying to conduct activities with impunity, where these allies can never say no to US actions within NATO's command structure because the consensus rule no longer applies, because the United States is seeking policies outside of the consensus structure, outside of the North Atlantic Council, which means that consensus no longer applies, so these allies will get more fearful, not less, because these allies would feel that they're no longer being listened to, that they will not get the assurances that they require. That is what their cohesion disadd links are about. The threshold for this deficit is extremely low. The Anderson evidence says, quote, any change to the US strategies, regardless of how these are depicted, lead allies to question whether the status has changed within the eyes of the US. US deterrence and assurance operate within a complex network of relationships. Any changes cascade throughout the entire system, giving rise to uncertainty in their country, which means that the fact that they've conceded this Anderson card, which was read in Tracy and extended in all of our speeches, means that any risk of a solvency deficit is massive, has massive impacts and generates proliferation, because creating this whole new framework, creating this whole new policy where we no longer use the consensus rule will be devastating for assurance. There are two further implications for this. One is that winning any risk of a deficit takes out the internal net benefit. FNCs would be bad for strengthening NATO because they would actively hurt cohesion, they would actively hurt the ability for allies to communicate. Second is that the fragmentation resulting from the FNC would render NATO follow-on impossible because allies would be fearful about the implications of the FNC and not agree to do so. Furthermore, every argument on the cohesion disadvantage was a massive straight turn to the counterplan's internal net benefit. You do not allow them to cross-apply their answers to the disadvantage because that is new and was not responded to in the block, which means that you should have dropped them from your flow. Operating without the consensus rules means that this hugely popular policy regarding the Baltics, there won't be the same kind of efficient agreement to carry out the action. The Skalupa evidence says that the age-old consensus rule is what allows the alliance to build a common understanding amongst members and build a habit of consultation and information sharing. This kind of cooperation is what is necessary to create a unified front for effective deterrence. The Baltics are popular, definitely matters, because it means that the bureaucratic structure will not hamper the plan, and in fact the consensus structure is necessary and definitely straight turns the internal net benefit to the counterplan and proves that NATO collapse is not inevitable in the status quo. They say that there will be delay and backlash, but they've dropped that NATO is focused on Ukraine and the Baltics now, that NATO is not collapsing in the status quo because they have read the uniquest evidence for us on the disadvantage. NATO has used the consensus rule for the past 70 years with a lot of success to provide a lot of resources to Ukraine and to Eastern European allies, which means that the plan is palatable and means that there will be no delay or backlash and that they're willing to do the same for the Baltics. They say that Turkey will say no, but this is an affirmative argument. Yes, there may be divisions, but those divisions are a reason why we must put the plan up for discussion among all NATO ally members, where we're forcing them to discuss with us the policies and require consensus, rather than having the United States create a new framework where allies do not have to, where say yes is not required, where the United States can pursue whatever they want with whatever policy they want, which causes a collapse in assurance. Look, our evidence is superior, our evidence is more specific. Do not sacrifice the age-old, tested alliance for a whole new strategy.
If I want to call for a card, what do I do?
Yeah, you're not allowed to.
You will be fined $500.
But I am going to remove myself so I don't get fined.
It's not illegal for me to like look at your screen, right? Can I see the Lucas card, please? Or like the one about the link turn, like Baltics and the air are popular.
Yeah. Lucas is their card.
Yeah.
No, Lucas is our card, but
Yeah.
the link turn card and the Baltics is their card.
Sorry, I wanted to look at Lucas first and then the link turn. This is so scuffed.
Least scuffed chess tournament.
Can I see the link turn now?
Yeah. There was 2 cards, right? I feel like all of them. The one about this AI popular,
Yeah.
and the second one is politics popular. And then the consensus card.
Here's the part about the card. Structure.
Okay, so thank you.
Belly, you guys, one of our teammates recorded. If you guys want the recording of the event,
Can I send this recording to my office if someone can send it to me?
yeah.
If it's not a competitor, it's not
Yeah, of course. Send it to everyone. Okay.
It's a big file. Hour-long video. Yeah. I don't think email chambers have that. In iCloud folder. And then send the link in that. Just the video itself is to be sent.